Love finances the other F word and want to support the show? Become a patron by going to patreon.com/FTOFW. You'll get special features, a shout out on the air, and early releases. Or if you prefer, pick up some merchandise at financestheotherfword.com.
As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finances the Other F Word, and today on the show we're going to talk about the debt ceiling. Now, I got to tell you, as an advisor, I am sick and fucking tired of having to talk to my clients about the debt ceiling every year to 2 years. And so I wanted you guys to understand a little bit about what the debt ceiling is and what it isn't, okay? But first of all, I wanted to give a shout out once again to 1001 Songs That Make Me Want to Die. I was on their show. We talked about Band on the Run by Wings, which I hate that fucking song. So go check it out. Those guys are a riot. Also, Zoe is not on the show with me today. She is having a very hard time recovering from her knee surgery, and she's in a lot of pain. So if you guys are on social media, give her a shout out and let her know that you're thinking of her and you hope that she has a good recovery, and the drugs aren't really helping, which fucking makes that 1,000 times worse, right? Now, let's get into it. Before we talk about the debt ceiling, it's important that you understand bond ratings. And this is going to come back over and over and over again when we're talking about the debt ceiling. Now, when you're talking about bond rating companies, there's S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. All right? Now, what happens is if you are looking at bonds and you're trying to decide if you are going to buy a bond, one of the things you might look at is the credit rating. How likely am I to get my money back? And so we've talked about bonds before, and let's say in the event of a corporate bond, if I want to build a warehouse and I get the approval process, I can go through and I can issue bonds, and then somebody's going to buy my bond. It's going to have a term of 10 to 20 years at a set yield, and then what will happen is that I'll pay them every single year their yield, and at the end of the time, when our term is done, I'm going to give them back the principal that they put in their last payment, and our transaction is done. That's how bonds work. So when we're talking about the U.S. Treasury, there's two major ways that they get funding into the U.S. Treasury. One of them is tax receipts. So if our taxes go up, they get more money into the Treasury to pay for the budget. If our taxes go down, then they get less money into the Treasury. And then the other major way that they end up getting, that they use to get cash into the system would be to issue Treasury bonds, okay? So they issue Treasury bonds to the public at a set term and a set yield, and then what happens is that people buy them. Now, one of the big reasons that people buy United States Treasuries is because they have a high credit rating. Now, if you have a company that you have a concern is going to default on you, you best fucking believe that you're going to expect them to pay you more money to take the risk on them that you might not get your principal back. You feel me? Okay? But if there's a very high rating, that of the bond you're buying, you would expect that the yield is going to be less because they're going to pay you less because they're considered the safer option. So bond ratings are very important when it comes to how much issuing debt is going to cost a company, or let's say in this case, the United States Treasury. Now, the fact that the United States Treasury and that United States bonds have such a high rating saves the United States Treasury about 0.25% of the going rate, which means that they can pay a bondholder of U.S. Treasury less for them buying their bond because of the fact that they have this very nice high rating. That equates to approximately $60 billion a year in savings, or $700 billion over a 10-year period. And so if the U.S. Treasury bonds rating slips, then what happens is they have to start paying people more money to take the risk of them buying their bond. Now, in the example that I was talking about with the corporate bonds, and this is going to come up later as well, you have a hierarchy of everything. Fixed income, bonds, equities, there's a hierarchy of payment in the event of a default. So let's say in the corporate space, You might have secured bonds, senior secured bonds, then secured debt, and then, senior unsecured debt, junior unsecured debt, and all the way down to, say, convertible bonds. And what that does is that in the event of a default, these people at top have a better chance of getting paid before any of these ones down below. And that is going to become very important when we're talking about the debt ceiling with the United States government here in a second. Now, back in 2009, when we were coming off of 2008, we had Greece, 2009, 2010, 2011. Greece went into default on their debt, and there had to be some fancy footwork that happened within the EU and all this other kind of bullshit that happened. And people would not buy bonds issued by the country of Greece because they didn't trust that they were actually going to get paid back. And so this is what happens when your credit rating starts to slip. So let's talk about what the debt ceiling is. The debt ceiling is getting permission from Congress to pay for expenditures that we have already incurred. Okay? It has nothing to do with overspending. It has nothing to do with controlling the amount of spending that's going on in the government. We've already incurred the expenditures. Now we need to get permission to issue the debt to pay for the expenditures that we've already issued. Do you guys follow me? It has nothing to do with controlling debt. It is getting the okay to pay for the things that we have already spent money on. And part of that is a comprehensive budget, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. And this is constantly a partisan issue. And they flip-flop. If it's one administration in the White House and another administration in Congress, they fucking fight and fight and fight and tooth and nail. But then soon as those positions flip, everybody flips their positions, and every time this fucking comes up, people are jockeying for positions because this is like a big sticking point of, oh, I maybe won't get reelected if people have this, vision that I'm allowing government spending. It has nothing to do with new government spending. It is an aggregate number of debt between intra-government offices and debt that's held in the public that we have already incurred and have already been issued. Okay? Now, again, has nothing to do with government deficits, does not directly control them. It's stuff that we've already spent money on. And I'm going to keep saying this because there's a lot of narrative out there that's telling you guys otherwise. And as always, all the resources are going to be in the show notes so you can read what I read and you can decide what you think for yourself. Now, in 1917, before 1917, we had no debt limit. In 1917, here we have the Second Liberty Bond Act come through, and it assigned the very first debt ceiling on the United States Treasury, which was $1 billion. And at the time in 1970, that was a fucking joke. They thought at no time would the United States government ever hit $1 billion. It was like this pie in the sky moonshot number just to put a number there. Well, in 2017, our debt ceiling limit was $22 trillion. As of right now, we have never had the United States Treasury default on paying their interest to bondholders, with the exception of 1812, when part of the Treasury was burned during the War of 1812. Okay? But if in the event that the debt ceiling is not raised, we have to revert to, the U.S. Treasury has to revert to what is called extraordinary measures. Now, we hit our debt ceiling the end of July of 2021. Since then, the U.S. Treasury has been using extraordinary measures to try to cut corners, to limp along enough to give Congress enough time to get their fucking shit together to try to do something instead of looking like they're doing something. And I'm just, you guys, I'm just so fucking pissed at this because when you're an advisor, every time this comes up, it fucking terrifies clients. And the closer they are to retirement, the more fucking frightening it gets. And the people in Congress, they don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck. They just want to sit around and posture to each other to try to make it look like they're doing something. And what we're going to see here in a minute is that the debt ceiling is not even really needed. It is literally just a political bullshit, partisan fucking circle jerk. Okay? The Government Accountability Office has been stating, okay, that, quote, the debt limit does not control or limit the ability of the federal government to run deficits or incur obligations. Rather, it is a limit on the ability to pay obligations already incurred, end quote, okay? Now, this is what happens. Every year since 1974 in the Nixon administration, there is a comprehensive budget that is put together by the president that goes in front of Congress that Congress has to approve. In the comprehensive budget, it says, this is how much money we're going to spend, and this is how much money we need to raise, or this is how much money we need to issue in treasury bonds, because of course the United States government year over year runs a deficit. And what happens is that budget goes in front of Congress. Congress does whatever they want to do with it, and they pass the budget. It's already explained how much money is going to need for that year. But then we see that the debt ceiling comes up, and then all of a sudden Congress on both fucking sides of the aisle has their panties in an uproar, like they don't fucking understand what amount of money needed to be raised for the fucking year. So this whole ring circus is ridiculous. Now, sorry, I caught it, calm down. You guys, it fucking pisses me off so much. Now, in the event that the debt ceiling is not raised, then extraordinary measures take over. Now, for instance, in 2011, we had a really big situation where we were very close to default, and there was a couple ramifications from that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So one of the things that they did with the extraordinary measures, or one of the things they can do, or a couple of things they can do, is that when it comes to thrift savings plans, they can suspend their investments in the G Fund. And then in 2011, in the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund, they suspended investments in that. And then the Postal Service Retiree Health Benefits Fund, they also suspended investments in that. And then in the Exchange Stabilization Fund, they did the same thing. But all of this stuff is minuscule. It doesn't do anything to get us to where we need to go. And so we keep limping along on extraordinary measures until in the event and or run the risk that we end up depleting those extraordinary measures. And then what happens is that the United States Treasury goes into default. In 2013, they surveyed 38 highly respected economists, and they found that 84% of them agreed that since a comprehensive budget is already in place and already approved by Congress, who is the same fucking people who approved the debt ceiling, that, quote, a separate debt ceiling that has to be increased periodically creates unneeded uncertainty and can potentially lead to worse fiscal outcomes. Okay? Now, Moody's, who's a bond rating agency, which we talked about at the top of the show, discussed and said that, quote, the debt limit creates a high level of uncertainty, and then suggested that it change, quote, its framework in managing government debt to lessen or eliminate that uncertainty. So you have Moody's saying this is ridiculous. You have economists coming out and saying this is ridiculous. You have unneeded things being where Congress approves it and then they fucking fight about it 9 months later, or depending on whenever the next debt ceiling comes up. I mean, this is fucking ridiculous. Now, when we talked about budgets, we talked about there's 4 categories. There's discretionary, non-discretionary, fixed, and variable. Non-discretionary is shit you have to spend money on. Discretionary is shit that you choose to spend money on. When you're looking at the United States budget, only a third of that budget is discretionary, meaning that that's a third of the budget they're choosing to spend money on. The rest of it is considered non-discretionary, and it is automatic spending programs on the United States government, like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. Okay, those are non-discretionary. They have to be paid. So a lot of times when you're talking about trimming the fat within the government, yes, there's things that they could do, but it's important for you to remember, again, that only a third of that is discretionary. The rest of it is non-discretionary. Where did this all start? Under Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, it says that Congress is the only one who can authorize the borrowing of money on behalf of the United States government. Now, this becomes a big bone of contention when you talk to legal scholars, because a lot of them say that's not what it says, and others say that's exactly what it says, and so then it becomes this piss match between the two of them. I'm not a scholar, and I'm not a fucking legal person, so I'm not going to weigh in on that, but I have the resources in the show notes if you want to go read it and, find it out amongst yourself. Now, in 1939 and 1941, we see that this gets amended through the Public Debts Act, okay? So we're starting to see modifications that are coming through. And again, Congress is the one who approves this, and they're also the one who already approved the budget, where it clearly told them the amount of money that we were going to need. Now let's talk about what happens if the debt ceiling is not approved. Now, On September 8th, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced that the extraordinary measures would run out sometime in October. And she has been a little bit hesitant to place a date on it, but she's saying anywhere from October 15th to November 4th. Then if the debt ceiling is not raised, then we could find that the U.S. Treasury could end up going on a default. And again, we've never done that before, so this is a big fucking deal. All right? Now, if the extraordinary measures are depleted, then the government is going to be without money for payroll and for government purchases, for Social Security checks, and Medicare, and all of those other non-discretionary programs that we talked about. All right? So if they keep dicking around like they do every fucking year, regardless of the administration, this is what happens, and this is the risk that we run every time the fucking debt ceiling comes back. In 2011, it was implied by the Treasury that they could not prioritize specific government expenditures or specific government issuing bonds that they issued over the others in the event of a default. So they hinted at the fact that no payments would be made. So when we talk about how the corporate bond structure, in the event that you have a corporation that's going into default, you have the hierarchy of bonds, and hopefully those people at the top are going to get paid their money. Well, the United States government said, nope, we can't do that, because in the eyes of the law, all of these payments are equal, which means that we just won't fucking pay anybody. So nobody's getting paid. And you know who holds treasury bonds? Other countries and older Americans. Yes, you have mutual funds, you have ETFs that specialize in that, and then you have some hedge funds that use it to, hedge their risk. But typically, the people buying treasury bonds are older people who are risk adverse. Democrats at this time proposed that they raise it and they suspend it until December 3rd of this year, of 2021. But again, that's kicking the fucking can down the road. This is ridiculous, and this happens with different administrations over and over and over again. Now, under the Obama administration, there was a lot of ludicrous talk, and not a lot, but there was talk about, minting $1 trillion coin to helping pay down some of our debt, which, of course, and Barack Obama has said in interviews that was just an idea that was floated out there, and it was ridiculous, and it never went any farther than that. The U.S. budget runs a deficit every single year. We've talked about that. That is the reason why they have to keep issuing bonds and keep issuing bonds. And so as a result, to run the budget of the United States, they have to borrow huge amounts of money. Those monies pay for salary for troops and all of those entitlement programs. And a lot of people who are on Social Security get really fucking pissed when I call Social Security an entitlement program, because they say, well, I paid for that and I put money in. Yes, you did, but it's still considered an entitlement program. So whatever, send your hate mail to my P.O. box. That's what the fuck it's called. All right. As of the time of this recording, the national debt now stands at around $28.5 trillion. $28.5 trillion at the time of this recording, and you can go to www.usdebtclock.org and you'll see a big fucking screen with a whole bunch of numbers, most of them in the red, that is depressing as fucking shit. Okay? Now, just to put this into context, we've talked about gross domestic product on this show multiple times, and gross domestic product, or GDP as it is referred to, is the value added created through production of goods and services in a country over a given time period. So just to put this in context for you, last year, our GDP was $20.93 trillion. Okay? So we have a national debt of $28.5 trillion, and last year, our GDP was $20.93 trillion. We're running a fucking deficit. This is why the debt ceiling keeps coming up. This is why we keep having issues. Clearly, we're spending more money than we should be, but the point is that the debt ceiling shouldn't have anything to do with this, because we've already approved a comprehensive budget. Now, what you're going to find here in a minute is you're going to see how much the debt ceiling has increased with just in the last 30 to 40 years versus the times prior. Now, in October of 2013, the Federal Reserve simulated what it would be like if the debt ceiling was not increased for a period of a month, and they used a date range between mid-October to mid-November. Okay? And so they just said, all right, let's just see what happens if the debt ceiling is not extended from like mid-October to mid-November in 2013, and this is what their simulation told them. They estimated that it would result in a 0.80% basis increase in treasury yields, okay? And so the government would have to pay people more money to borrow money from them to fund the government. And then 30% decline in stock prices, which we've seen this when we had our fiscal cliff issue with the Bush tax cuts, and we had a debt ceiling debate. We had a whole bunch of other fucking shit that happened, which sucked at that time. And the market just gave up the ghost. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So they were estimating 30% decline in stock prices and a 10% drop on the dollar. And they were expecting that the hit that it would take to consumer and business confidence would take 2-year periods to wane out of the economy. Now, but let's look at a recent study. Moody's, they ran a simulation, and they said that if the debt ceiling, this impasse with the debt ceiling lasted through November, they would expect that employment would decline by 5 million and real GDP would decline by almost 4%. That's fucking huge. And then it would take us the next few quarters to get back on our feet. Now, I tried to go to Burger King yesterday, and the drive-thru was so backed up. I tried to go in the dining room. Dining room is locked. And there's a sign on the door that says, we don't have enough staff to let anybody in the dining room. So can you imagine now, with everything going on with COVID, we have another 5 million job decline on the job market? And this is what they're predicting through Moody's right now. Also, as we mentioned before, when the Treasury has said, hey, we can't prioritize who we would pay back because in the eyes of law, they're all on equal footing. If in the event that the United States goes into a default on their debt, then they are expecting a slew of legal charges and legal challenges where people are going to come through and then they're going to have to start fighting it out. Yes, but this bondholder should get paid before this bondholder, et cetera, et cetera. And we already know our legal system is bogged down already. And so in 2011, I talked about this for a minute, we reached a crisis point with the fiscal cliff, and this was a fun time to be an advisor. Now, what we saw that for the first time in history, the U.S. Treasury debt was downgraded. Okay, so it dropped a credit rating. I don't know if it was one or a couple. It depends. I can't remember exactly, but it was downgraded from the first time in history. And what we saw is a 2,000-point drop in the Dow between July and August, which was really fun to be an advisor. And then on August 8th, we saw the Dow close down at 635 points. And then we saw that the increase in borrowing costs came through when the United States was issuing the treasuries. Now, this was called the fiscal cliff. This is a big fucking deal. We had Bush tax cuts that had been extended, that were getting ready to expire, and they had to decide if they were going to renew them or not. We had the debt ceiling coming back in it, and then they had a previous enacted law that basically said that the fiscal cliff was projected to produce a 19.63 increase in revenue, but only reduce spending by 0.25%. Okay, and so I mean, again, if you ran a household like this, you can't fucking do this, right? Now, we continue to see this shit show moving through Congress where every single time the debt ceiling comes up, they want to start fighting each other to get what they want. So right now we have the Republicans that are trying to push the debt ceiling issue because they want concessions on, Biden's infrastructure plan. And then all throughout history, those things change. And then all of a sudden, whoever has a point to prove or is maybe in the minority of the political parties, they're now waving the banner on the debt ceiling. Now it's this big fucking deal. And we see this over and over and over again. And I've seen this numerous times while I have been in the business. In July 2019, we almost defaulted again due to lower tax revenue coming into the U.S. Treasury. We talked about that's one of the ways that they get money. And they ended up hitting the debt limit in March of the same year. And we almost went into default. And at that time, Goldman Sachs had estimated that unless the ceiling was increased, the U.S. Treasury could be forced to cut payments by 40%. Now, if this happens, of course, we've seen furloughs in the past, and then we've seen government shutdowns. So which political party has raised the debt ceiling the most? Now we know that since 1917, the debt ceiling has been raised 98 times. Again, we are only raising on the debt ceiling for things that we have already spent money on. Okay, so the debt ceiling since 1970, since its inception, has been raised 98 times, but we see since 1960, 78 of those 98 times has been when it has been raised. So from 1960 to present day, the debt ceiling has been raised 78 separate times, 49 times under a Republican president and 29 times under a Democratic president. So I have all the resources in the show notes. And I just wanted you guys to understand a little bit about what the debt ceiling is and what the debt ceiling isn't. Because what you will hear a lot of times, as you will hear again, politicians say that they're going to rail in government spending. But the deal is that with a comprehensive budget, debt ceiling's kind of moot at this point, and accept the fact that it's just a posturing position for whichever administration at the time is using it. So I hope this information was helpful for you guys. We'll see what happens. I don't fucking know. I've gone through this so many times, and as many times as I've talked to clients during this period about what's happening, it never fails. The next time we go through it, they call me with the same questions. So check out the resources in the show notes. Slide into our DMs on social media if you have questions, or hit us up via text 775-537-4352. Make sure you follow us on social media at Finance is the Other F Word. My book, Finance is the Other F Word, Another F Word to Love, is available on Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. And send your well wishes to Zoe. And as always, we appreciate you guys listening. And I'm out this bitch.
Thank you for listening. Please check back for upcoming episodes and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Finances, the Other F Word.